This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell and Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com.
I spent my day campaigning Sunday. I'm very flexible. I can get around the state. I've also declared war on potholes. So here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out. And he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a WCNY podcast about power and politics in New York. And on this episode, we're doing a post-mortem on the Democratic primaries in the Empire State. And with most of the excitement happening in the Big Apple, we're checking in with Mr. New York City himself, City and State New York Editor-in-Chief Jeff Coltin. Thanks for making the time, Jeff.
Thank you for having me back. Always happy to talk elections and anything else.
Well, I guess for starters, I'm curious, now that you're a big maca in journalism, how did you spend your election night?
I spent my election night with a little bit of FOMO because I was at home and I was managing the team across the city and the state. So even though I missed out on election night parties for the first time in a long time, it was an incredible experience because it was really cool to see the breadth of city and state power. And our reporters were at tons of election night parties. We had all these stories being written and being sent in. We had a live blog. We had stories dropping. We had news alerts. We had tweets. It's really fun to be in the nerve center of an election night operation like City and States. And I should say I was managing this from my kitchen table, but my kitchen table is in the heart of the 12th congressional district. So, I was looking out my window. There were fireworks going off. People were shouting Micah Lasher out the windows. It was just incredible excitement. Forget about the New York Knicks winning. I mean, this was even bigger on the Upper West Side. I am kidding.
Okay.
However, at Jacob's Pickles, at Micah Lasher's campaign event, it really was a lot of big excitement. It just, it maybe didn't spread to the streets.
Well, it was a long night, I think, for some of the people at that party because we had an interview scheduled for Wednesday morning with one of the people that I spotted on the dais with him, and they needed to push that back as they needed a little more recovery time. But I guess turning to the results, there are a lot of different conclusions and headlines being written locally and across the country about the Democratic primaries in New York. Is there one narrative that has emerged for you, or do you think maybe it's a mistake to paint with a broad brush when reflecting on the results, given how many local dynamics could be at play with a lot of these races?
Yeah, as always, it depends so much district to district. Look, obviously, among the three Mamdani primaries, but with Brad Lander, with Claire Valdez, with Daria Liza Avila Chevalier, there was a through line. There was a through line of voters saying we want a more progressive, a Democratic Socialist, or at least Democratic Socialist leaning representative. And we don't want the old guard. And so that was a clear through line. That was surprising results in some cases. But of course, there's complications. There's also the New York 12 primary with Micah Lasher winning. A very different narrative there. I was paying attention to New York 17 with Kate Conley winning. Also a different narrative there. So there was some through line of a really big night for DSA and for socialism and for Mamdani and for AOC. But, that doesn't apply across the board. There's other interesting takeaways as well.
Well, you mentioned the Brad Lander endorsement in the race against Dan Goldman. I wonder how big of a deal the Mamdani support is in that race, given that if you go back to that 2022 crowded primary that Goldman won, he almost seems like an accidental congressman because if a couple candidates get out of that race, we're talking about Congresswoman Yulene New, and she didn't necessarily need a big DSA wave. She needed Carlina Rivera and maybe some others to get out of that race. So, how do you think about that Lander victory?
Yeah, that one was actually different. That wasn't a Mamdani win. I mean, sure, look, having the mayor on his side, I do think helped drive some attention to Lander. But I think Brad was going to win no matter what. He was the pseudo incumbent in this district. Yeah, Goldman won in a really crowded field in 2022. He faced only token opposition in 2024, and even then, really underperformed what you would expect in such a district. And so Brad Lander, he was the city controller. He ran for mayor. He was a city council member for 12 years before that. This is a guy that is really well known in at least the Brooklyn part of the district, but also citywide. So even though Goldman was literally the incumbent, Brad Lander had more local connections, longer local connections, I presume better name recognition among the electorate. And that was really the core of this. I mean, yes, Lander was running to his left, and he got a lot of votes because of that, because people wanted a more progressive representative. But I think the core of this was actually more of those longstanding local ties. And that's why he beat Goldman so handily by really a landslide.
There's this narrative coming out of Tuesday that the DSA is now driving the bus when it comes to the far left wing of the Democratic Party in New York, and that groups like the New York Working Families Party are not as influential as maybe they seemed to be or maybe hoped to be. Maybe that was the case already, though, after the Mamdani victory in 2025. I mean, what do you think about the DSA role after this election?
Well, look, that is an easy narrative. It's true. I mean, there was a DSA versus WFP head-to-head in the 7th congressional district, and Clara Valdez absolutely crushed Antonio Reynoso, something like 20 points. So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to say that DSA is the more influential group here. I will say the organizations are they're set up differently, and they're trying to do different things. And WFP is a much larger organization. They endorsed, I don't even know how many candidates they endorsed.
All over the state, yeah.
Dozens, all over the state. And, they have the ballot line. They're always thinking about the ballot line. That's a huge asset in general elections. DSA is it's a different organization, and they zero in. They endorse fewer candidates, and they really, really throw in resources and everything behind those endorsed candidates. WFP, by contrast, I mean, some candidates, they give them an endorsement and then they seem to ignore them completely otherwise. It's not the same kind of thing. And so, yes, DSA absolutely is on top, is more powerful, but it's like they're not really competing on the exact same ground. They're running slightly different strategies when it comes to politics on the left side of the ledger.
And the other thing I think about with the DSA versus the WFP is this enthusiasm gap, because as you pointed out, the WFP is extending its brand to dozens of races all over the state. Somewhere they're not necessarily leaning in with their shoulder, whereas the DSA, when they pick a spot, they lean into that, and their voter base is sort of activated. Can you talk about enthusiasm and turning out voters and where that seemed to make a real big difference in primary night?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, that's what DSA has going for it. And, combined with that, Zohran Mamdani. It's like there's just this absolute wave of momentum. People want to be with a winner, with a movement, with something that's exciting. And I think there's a lot of voters out there who maybe they agree with DSA politics. Maybe they don't even agree with everything. But it's just the idea of being with the winners, being with this exciting movement that's pushing the Democratic hierarchy and challenging them. And this is a time when there is a lot of anti-incumbent sentiment and anti-establishment sentiment. There's this widespread feeling that Democrats aren't countering Donald Trump enough. And I think that that's a really big part of this, particularly zeroing in on the DAC win. She ran up really good margins in central Harlem. And I don't think that was a vote specifically for socialism. I think that was a vote for a change candidate and somebody who's young and exciting and new. We totally see this with AOC, where she has fans across the country, literally across the world, many of whom don't specifically agree with her on politics. Just they really like her energy, and they like that she's different and that she's young and exciting and pushing things. And so, a lot of the DSA policies are broadly popular. If you poll a lot of them, they do well. But I think it's more than just the policy. It's also these other intangibles.
You highlight the nuance in all of this, and in the aftermath of a big election night like this, there's often a loss of nuance. So are there any hot takes that you've seen that you think are missing the mark, or maybe don't really understand the local issues or people that are involved in some of these races?
So many. Look, an interesting one has been New York 12, Michael Lasher versus Alex Boris. And there is so many competing postmortems here about, okay, did the AI money affect the race? Did Jack Schlossberg, JFK's grandson, how did that affect the race? The funny part is like the end result was what you could have predicted 8 months ago when the candidates first came in, of like, oh, okay, if you're having a West Side candidate versus an East Side candidate, they're going to get some elected official endorsements on each side of the park, but the West Side candidate who has longer relationships is going to end up prevailing over the East Side candidate. There's simply more votes on the West Side. And also Lasher, worked for Kathy Hochul, worked for Mike Bloomberg, worked for Eric Schneiderman, worked for Jerry Nadler himself. Whereas Alex Boris is a rising star, certainly, but much more of a newcomer to the world of politics. Was only elected to the assembly in 2022, and was a little bit outside of the local politics world before that, famously, briefly working for Palantir. So, yeah, I mean, like in the end, it was the fundamentals. It was like, of course, Lasher would win, and, he would win close. And that's like exactly what happened. So it's hard to say at this point. And I actually look forward to diving more into the hot takes and the analysis. City and State is certainly working on a piece on this of what was the core of this race. But that was a funny one where it was exactly what you would expect. And look, you could argue the same thing for the Claire Valdez race. I didn't expect that margin. I didn't expect her to win that big. But look, when she announced back in January, there's kind of a feeling of like, well, she's got the new exciting mayor, the popular mayor on her side. Maybe there's nothing Reynoso can do. And that's what happened. Brad Lander too. Brad Lander, as soon as he got in, this race was over. Like, of course, he was going to beat Dan Goldman. The real surprise was DAC over Espaillat. That one people did not predict months ago. That one everyone thought that Espaillat would win. And just over time, the fundamentals of that race shifted, particularly with that Mamdani endorsement that I think really skyrocketed her from, interesting, maybe doing okay progressive candidate to like all-star.
Well, I want to come back to that narrative you brought up from NY12, which is there is a certain amount of predictability in politics when you look at the fundamentals of these races. Don't overthink it when someone has certain strengths, and those strengths play out on Election Day. And I think that is also going to be emblematic of the vast majority of the Democratic primaries that happened on Election Day, many without any fanfare. I mean, here at the Capitol, the majority of the Democrats who are here in 2026 are going to be back in 2027. And I wonder whether you think that is a important narrative, or whether people are hanging too much emphasis on this idea of, well, they didn't sweep out all of the incumbents and they just took out a few, so it's not really a big deal.
Yeah, it's a good point. Look, there's two ways to judge this. I mean, there's the overall, take a step back. Yes, the vast majority of incumbents on the ballot won.
Tom
They
DiNapoli
won easily.
cruised.
Tom DiNapoli. Totally. That, and even down to assembly members. I'm scrolling through the results right now. Clyde Vanell won 71% of the vote. He's coming back.
Brian Cunningham, Tony Simone.
Exactly. They all were on the ballot. They all had challengers. It's just that those challengers, failed to get any support or any meaningful support. But if you zero in on the races that were like competitive, if you zero in on the races that were really expected to be close, then it's a bad night for incumbents. And I mean, that's the funny part. You can always adjust after the fact for, oh, well, of course we knew that race was going to be close. Of course that one doesn't count as a competitive race. But broadly, I mean, if you look at certainly all the DSA races, and then even beyond that, there were a lot of races where incumbents lost. I mean, I think it's 6 incumbent legislators, maybe 7, depending on Bill Magnarelli versus Maurice Brown, could be losing their seats in the primary. And of course, there's still November upcoming, where incumbents could lose their seats as well. So again, it just all depends on how you look at things. But I can tell you that 6, maybe 7 incumbents all losing, Albany's legislators have to be freaking out. There's certainly a concern come 2028 that there's going to be even more targets that they're going to lose. It's not a sea change, because this has been the way now for like a decade of in 2018 maybe it was more WFP, but this has been a consistent thing of lefty challengers coming in and knocking out longtime incumbents, and this is just the latest edition of it.
Well, some of those names who will not be coming back to Albany are Eric DeLon, Eddie Gibbs, Jennifer Rajkumar, Stephanie Zinnerman. Any insight into those people in particular? Because those are lawmakers that are unique personalities. They have been targets of far-left movements for a while. So anything stand out on those races?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, on DeLon and Zinnerman, both of them have been challenged by DSA candidates before, and they won. Then this year, the difference was DSA is bigger, DSA is stronger, and DSA has even more momentum with Mamdani in office. And so this time, DSA candidates were able to unseat those exact same incumbents that defeated them before. So, I mean, that one is notable. Rajkumar is also interesting because she was not a lefty insurgent, but she was somebody that unseated a longtime incumbent back in 2020. I can't even remember his name right
Mike
now.
Miller.
Michael Miller?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Mike Miller. There you go. Okay, so yeah, Rajkumar came in and unseated Mike Miller, and she was running as a new, exciting, interesting candidate. At the time, she was running as much more of a progressive.
She's a chameleon, though. I mean, this more centrist thing hadn't worked for her. She went to the left, and after that experience, came back to the center with her Eric Adams Rajkumar ticket. I mean, yeah, she's been adaptable.
Totally. And she was running on a I will be more representative of the community. She was the first Indian woman elected to the state legislature. Mike Miller was an older white man. And so she was running on all those things. She won. It was a big change in the community. And now, 6 years later, David Orkin, a DSA candidate, was running, kind of vaguely on similar lines of saying, I'm new, I'm exciting, you're old, you're ossified, you're part of the establishment.
It comes for all of us, Jeff. It comes for all of us one day.
It comes for all of us. It happens so quickly. So yeah, that's a really interesting one as well.
And what about Eddie Gibbs? He briefly in the assembly, a real pot stirrer here at the Capitol and in his district. I mean, was that something that was predictable? Was that part of any sort of different demographic trends, or is this just a Eddie Gibbs, time to go, buddy?
Yeah, this is a mix of things. I mean, look, he lost to Diana Ayala. She was a New York City Council member in this exact district for 8 years, and she was a popular one. Everybody likes her in the district. That's part of it. It's also demographic. This is a more Latino district. Gibbs was the first Black assembly member to represent this one in decades. It has traditionally been a Latino-held seat. Now it's going back to that with Ayala. And then also, I love Eddie Gibbs, but he's an odd duck. And my understanding is that he did not campaign at all until session was over. I think he just didn't do a dang thing until June 10th or whatever. And so, the fundamentals of that, Diana had been working the district for a longer time. So yeah, that one doesn't fit as easily into the policy focus. That one's not as much about ideology. That one is more about those simple fundamentals.
Do you think we hear from Eddie Gibbs or Jennifer Rajkumar ever again?
Look, Eddie Gibbs was a political operative for years and years before he ended up running. He was, somebody who was always out there canvassing, campaigning, I would expect Eddie to stay involved in the world of politics in some way. Raj Kumar, that's a harder one. The world of politics in some ways has chewed her up and spit her out. She had an alliance with Eric Adams. Obviously, he's out. She ran for public advocate against Jumaane Williams last year. That went very poorly. She's got some very devoted, supportive followers. I could see her staying in the world of politics, going into advocacy or something, taking on leadership of an organization. Or, she's a lawyer. I could also see her just maybe fading away, taking a break for a while, working in a law firm or something. It could go either way. I haven't checked in with the assembly member since the primary, but I would be interested in hearing her thoughts on which way it goes there.
There's a narrative going around that these campaigns were more vitriolic, meaner than the past. Was that your impression of things, or is that just how older politicians reflect on these things and just say, we used to do it nicer in our day, forgetting the fact that we used to have vote for Cuomo, not the homo. So it's not like things were always so friendly.
Yeah, there's always a recency bias. There were ugly campaigns. There was, really personal attacks on Raj Kumar, certainly, and also Uptown in the Espaillat DAC race. That said, that's an example of one where when Espaillat was running against Congressman Charlie Rangel, when he was trying to take him down, that was an incredibly racially charged primary, as you might say. That was a Black Harlem versus Latino Washington Heights, and it got really ugly with lots of smears thrown around and allegations of corruption and messy politics. So yeah, this race got ugly too. But sadly, that's not new in uptown politics. That's kind of the state of being. And we also saw lots of Islamophobia against Mayor Mamdani last year, and we continue to see that. And frankly, we also saw lots of really ugly attacks on Andrew Cuomo. It might feel different because Cuomo was such a power player for so long, but really ugly, unfair attacks on that guy as well. So yeah, politics, elections are ugly, have been ugly. This was the latest example of that.
Does any of the enthusiasm from primary night, and I say enthusiasm with a bit of a grain of salt given how low the turnout was compared to 2025, but does any of that enthusiasm, you think, translate into the general elections? Or for most of these people, is it mission accomplished, work's already done, these are safe blue seats? Or do you think they're going to get involved in some of the purple districts outside of New York City, or try to figure out a way to knock out Malliotakis in the lone GOP New York City district?
It's a funny situation because those swing districts around New York City, Tom Suozzi, Laura Gillen, and now Mike Lawler, those are the Democratic candidates that are running so quickly away from DSA and are denouncing the wins, are distancing themselves from Mamdani and from the Socialist Project. So, it's funny, even though Laura Gillen could probably benefit from a wave of young, engaged door knockers coming in from Ridgewood, Queens to the South Shore of Nassau County, I just don't see that happening at any large scale because she wouldn't want that. They wouldn't want that. There's a real difference of opinion on how to win these seats. So that's where the attention is going to turn. Those three seats are right directly around New York City. Kate Conley versus Mike Lawler, then Tom Suozzi versus Mike LaPetrie, the Republican, and Republican Janine Driscoll trying to unseat Democrat Laura Gillen on the Long Island seat. I don't expect the Nicole Malliotakis seat to be contested seriously by Democrats. There is a candidate who, Mike DeSillis.
First time I've ever heard his name.
Exactly. I think Democrats are really just kind of focusing on hoping that redistricting can save that seat in the future, can flip it back and somewhat. I would be surprised if there was much attention paid there. And then, of course, there's some upstate seats too. There's Josh Riley versus Peter Oberacker. If New York City voters are willing to hop on a bus to go up to that sprawling Hudson Valley all the way to central New York seat. And then there's the intriguing one, Anthony Constantino up in the North Country. Is he so out of the realm of norm that Democrats would be able to flip that seat? I don't think so,
no.
But we'll see if there's going to be an effort or attention paid to that one. So, long story short, no, I don't expect the core DSA excitement of New York City to actually be converting to this race, to any of these races. However, if you expand that into the more, motivated anti-Trump, no kings, liberal Democrats, then yes, I think there will be a real push to go knock doors, canvass in these districts. And, I think Kathy Hochul's real push is going to be to get voters out in November. I think she is feeling confident. I think the fundamentals are very good for the incumbent Democratic governor in this case. I think maybe she'll be leaning on Tish James to help get the vote out just because she's more of a political celebrity.
Not in NY7.
That's true. That's true. Tish's endorsement could not help Reynoso. But, there's a lot less excitement in New York City going into the general election.
Well, lastly, what's going on with control of the Brooklyn Democratic Committee?
So glad you asked. This is something that City and State has been on for years and years. There were 10 contested district leader races. And it was the Reformers, the New Kings Democrats, versus Rodney Spichat-Hermelin, the Brooklyn Democratic leader, the Brooklyn boss. 10 contested races. The Reformers won 9 of them. And they needed, I think, 8 in order to – actually, no, I think they needed all 9 in order to get the majority of the board in order to elect a reformer. And they got that. They got the majority. So later this year, roughly around September – all of those district leaders are going to go into a room and they're going to vote for a new Brooklyn Democratic boss. The big question is, can Rodney manage to whip the votes? Can she somehow, flip a member or two? Will she even hold on to her block in order to win? Or are the reformers going to come together and say, we have the votes, we need to decide on somebody else and take the power away from the Brooklyn Democratic leader?
Is there a clear alternative, though? Is there a clear person that they would lean to?
No, there is not yet a clear alternative. There's not one reformer who has raised their hand and said, I will be the one to be the new Brooklyn boss. My eyes are on Sandy Nurse, New York City Council member Sandy Nurse. She is a WFP candidate. She's really lefty. She's socialist aligned, but she's not actually a member of DSA. She's popular. She dominated her district leader race. And as we've seen with other New York City area bosses, they really like to have elected officials. We have, Charles Fall on Staten Island, Greg Meeks in Queens, Jamal Bailey in the Bronx. And so Sandy Nurse is one who already is holding office. I wouldn't be too surprised if she became the one. But there's other options. There's other district leaders who might raise their hand and want to become the next Brooklyn boss. So City and State's going to be following that one really closely. It's very different than a legislative race. It's internal. But the Brooklyn Democratic Party, it's the biggest in the state. Tons of members. Everybody always goes to their parties.
It's got to be the biggest in the country.
They always say it's the biggest in the country, but Los Angeles County is absolutely massive. Los Angeles County has like 10 million people. So like the Los Angeles County Dems is actually bigger than the Brooklyn Dems. But, it would be fun if Brooklyn were the biggest in the country. Screw LA. But sadly, they're not. They're definitely the biggest on the East Coast at the very least.
Well, we've been speaking with Jeff Coltin. He's the editor-in-chief for City and State New York. Jeff, thank you so much for making the time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Happy to talk about all these elections. Thanks for having me back.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would you ask the sponsor to yield, please?
Will the sponsor yield?
Well, you didn't fix my tie this year, so I don't know. Yes, I'll yield.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you. I read last year's transcript also. So we're doing this again.